We wanted to welcome you to our discussion about mergers and strategies for a successful integration. Um, I'm Allison Fries, the CEO of ResultsLab. I'll be your moderator for today. And just wanted to give you a little bit of background about myself, first, specifically where it comes to mergers. Um, Prior to ResultsLab, I was actually with an investment bank, and I advised many small and mid-sized companies on how to dial in their operations to prepare for an exit. It was an awesome time. It was a great learning experience to see how various organizations needed the nuances of preparing for exit. And in fact, every organization over the last 20 plus years that I've been a part of has had some form of merger that I was involved with, some sort of integration that I participated in. In the largest one that I helped support, it was a consulting project that was for over 3 years, integrating thousands of employees. And it was fascinating. I learned so much, made so many mistakes through that I'm happy to share at any time. Lots of arrows in the back. But I think one of the biggest things that I took away from that is just the importance of the employee and the fundamentals of what employees need in going through a process like this. We can talk all day long about how merging 2 or 3 organizations together might increase impact, it might increase financials, it might do all sorts of amazing things. But at the end of the day, the employees wanted to know, who's my boss? Where am I going to sit? Are my benefits changing? And really some of those basics that are about them. So we're going to include that in our conversation today. You'll hear more about that. I see Jen and Susan nodding along. So I know you know exactly what this feels like. Outside of ResultsLab, I'm the vice president of the board for We Don't Waste. I try to pitch this as much as I can because it's an organization near and dear to my heart. It's a Denver-based nonprofit that supports food, that takes food that would otherwise go to the landfill and gives it to people who need it. And here at ResultsLab, so back to M&A. At ResultsLab, we sit at the intersection of mission, data, systems, and programming. And you're never going to see a greater stress test to these 4 things than when you are integrating organizations, and especially when you're talking about multiple organizations. And in fact, Kenzie Strong, who is on the call, she's off camera. She's our Vice President of Product and Innovation, has handled many of these projects for ResultsLab. And in fact, one of them with Susan, who is our panelist here today. So Kenzie may chime in every now and then with her perspective of how we manage that at ResultsLab. So don't be surprised if you see her name pop in every now and then. When you RSVP'd for this event, we asked each of you to report into us about what do you want to hear about? What do you want to learn? What matters to you most on this topic? And here are some of the things that bubbled to the top. One that kept coming up kind of as a meta theme across the board was the psychological safety that comes with a merger. In fact, someone responded, it's just not even safe for us to have this conversation today. So we want to talk through a lot of this. And part of that fear comes from the fear of losing your identity, of your brand, of your culture. So we'll address this as we go along as well. We also have multiple funders on the call. These funders had stated that they're recognizing this as a trend in the sector today. And they came to us stating that they want to create a safe environment for their grantees. So if you are a funder on this call, as you're listening through, I'd love for you to be thinking about how can you be providing a safe environment and supporting your grantees as the sector is going through a transformation as we speak, and how can you support them with considerations for a merger? And overall, the top request that came from all of you is that you want to hear practical takeaways. You don't want to hear imaginary stories and visions, and you really want those tools, the checklists, the frameworks, and real examples of what the people on this call, what our panelists experienced, and how they help support a journey and the mistakes that were made along the way from all different angles. So we're going to do our best to provide that for you. And in fact, at the end of this call, we will be providing you with a checklist to get ready for considering a merger if that's what you'd like to do. As for the flow of this, we're going to move through this conversation that in a way that mirrors the actual journey of considering a merger. So from the very beginning of, should we even consider this? And how do we talk through this down to, okay, how do we make it stick? In this short period of time, of course, we're not going to be able to go super deep on each of those topics. So we'll stay pretty surface level, but so pretty wide and not deep. In the future, happy to have further conversations if there's interest in going deep in each of those various phases. Okay, enough from me. Let's introduce our panelists, who I am so happy to have join us today. Mike, I'm going to start with you. Want to introduce Michael King, who leads the pro bono legal services at Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, Schreck. And as I go around and introduce you, I'll say a little bit about, read your bio and ask you a question just to kind of get us warmed up. If you can respond in 1 or 2 sentences, that'll be perfect for this section. So Mike founded the Pro Bono Clinic at Brownstein and is very active providing pro bono legal services in the social sector, including mergers between nonprofits or philanthropic organizations. Mike guides clients through their organization's most pivotal moments. While he works across industries, he brings significant experience in the healthcare arena, ensuring his clients achieve their business goals. Outside of his practice, Mike has chaired 5 different boards, including with organizations consummating mergers and partnerships of their own, and brings experience from the advisor and principal side of the table. Mike, if you can add anything I might have missed, and then answer what question do you wish more organizations would ask before they started a merger conversation?
Sure. Well, thanks for that introduction, Allison. And I'm just really excited to have all these people together on this topic because, as you said, mergers can almost feel like taboo. We can't talk about that, right? We're somehow being disloyal to the cause if we talk about that in a board meeting. And I think that the number one question I try and frame up a lot of the subsequent hard conversations with is, what do we hope to achieve for the mission, right? And so for a corporate lawyer to talk about heart may seem a little off for you guys, but begin with your heart, right? That's what brought us to the mission in the first place. And how do we best serve that mission? And it may require hard conversations, hard decisions, but begin with the end in mind.
That's great, Mike. Thank you. Now I'll turn to Jen. Jen Thompson is an experienced M&A consultant and advisor of Alchemy Advisors. Her expertise focuses on supporting buyers with integration portfolio governance, risk management and oversight, organizational change management, and integration management office, or IMO, leadership. She also coaches small and medium-sized businesses on operational exit readiness. Jen leads organizations to develop and execute robust post-merger integration plans, including synergies and success alignment, technology rationalization and user adoption, talent management and org design, operational process transitions, and culture assimilation as part of the M&A transition. Jen is also president of Women of Mergers and Acquisitions Network, or WOMEN, WOMAN, a membership-based organization with the mission to enrich the lives of women in M&A. I've seen Jen in action in this, and I highly recommend you check it out if you're interested. So Jen, for you, please add anything I might have missed. And in the many integrations that you've led, can you share a moment that sticks out when you knew this was going to be harder or better than you expected?
Yeah, thank you for having me here today. It's great to be here. I don't have anything to add to the bio. And I think for me, what I always start with when I work with clients is a stakeholder interview and working with all of the leaders across the different organizations. And where I see things get a little bit harder is when there's misaligned visions, going back to what Michael said. There's a lack of strategy and unclear definition of success. And so those are the moments when I find there's going to be a little bit more work to do to get alignment across the leadership so that they can come to the table with a clear understanding.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Thank you. And finally, Susan Duncombe. Susan is the founder and principal consultant of Wholehearted Consulting. She brings firsthand nonprofit merger experience, offering insights into how teams sustain culture, maintain community trust, and steer complex transitions while keeping clients and stakeholders centered. So Susan, for you, please add anything I might have missed and help us understand what's the thing nobody tells you about mergers that you wish somebody had told you in the many that you've been involved in.
Thanks, Allison. The only piece I would add to my intro is that as a licensed clinical social worker, but most recently supporting in my consulting business a lot around operations, I really like to think about people as our greatest asset, but also impact and how you pull it all together. So really excited to be here and excited there's so much interest in this conversation, especially during these times where I know a lot of us in nonprofit land are struggling. My answer to your question is over communication, I think, is the one thing that can easily be put aside. And it's so important that internally we're controlling the narrative to all the stakeholders, donors, staff, board members, volunteers, all the pieces. And I think I learned that the hard way, that you think, oh, it's a good enough comms plan. And then people are talking, especially in our smaller communities of nonprofits.
Great, thank you, Susan. Okay, let's move on to some of the questions that we have for you all. So starting out with the landscape and mission alignment, actually each of you sort of touched on this a little bit in your responses already. And Mike, I'm going to start with you. Can you walk us through kind of the overall spectrum? Like you mentioned, the word merger is often seen as taboo. So let's just understand the overall landscape, and what are some of the alternatives to that?
Sure, and this could be a whole entire full day class, right? So we'll keep it to a few sentences. Fundamentally, have people like the professionals on this board, on this panel, advising you and guiding you, because what I try to do first is listen, right? The most important organ in the human body, perhaps. Listen really carefully, ask good questions, and then an advisor can help tailor the structure to what the needs are. I'll rattle off a few, and we're not going to walk through them, but just know that a merger is two entities fundamentally coming together, two legal entities coming together. And at the end of the merger, there's only one surviving entity. Other structures include an asset acquisition, where the desired assets are cherry picked out and maybe some liabilities are assumed. Those are probably the two most common. If you think about it at the partnership, you're establishing a partnership, you go through a courtship phase, which we'll talk about a little bit. You go through that courtship phase, and then how do we best meet the interests and goals and synergies of this partnership? So you could also look at doing a joint venture. There are other scenarios where maybe one entity is not going to survive, and they found another entity that's aligned in terms of mission and values, and they figure all that out. They make a donation, one entity to the other, and then post-donation, the entity making the donation of all of its assets goes away. It does what's called a dissolution. And lastly, you can do a board substitution where a whole new board comes into an entity, or a portion of a board changes hands to align with a different vision with a partner. So I'll stop there. There's a lot we could go into in those, but that just gives you a
Yeah.
sense.
No, that's helpful. And Jen, anything to add to that?
No, I think that the Mike mentioned the joint venture. I also have heard it called a managed services organization, where you can join back office or operational shared services together to help with any kind of cost management.
That makes a ton of sense in this sector, for sure. And Susan, let me turn to you. This actually rolls off of what you, as part of your introduction, figuring out whether mission alignment is real or just assumed. I mean, we might have two organizations that are coming together that think they're aligned on their mission because they're sharing their goals and their vision surround the same social issue, but they might have entirely different ways of or mindsets about how to meaningfully change and how to bring about that change in that social issue. So wondering, how do you know if it's real or if it's not? Did we lose Susan? We might have lost Susan for a moment. Jen, do you have any thoughts on that?
I got distracted by the camera going off. Can you say that again?
Yeah, exactly. We're trying to figure out how to align mission, and how do you know if two organizations' missions truly are aligned? So you might have, they might be working on the same social issue, but they have very different perspectives on how to solve the problems of that social issue.
Yeah, and that's really important, because you may have a common terminology or something like that, like youth services, but one might be sharing or putting in place the right services. Another might be really trying to change the overall structure and systems supporting youth services, generally speaking. So digging into what those missions are and what the programming is that backs up those missions, I think really helps to get clarity around, are there synergies, to use that term, between what you're going to deliver in the end. So I would dig a little bit more into the programming, and then also the donor funding, and making sure that there's alignment with the funding and where that's coming from, and the expectation of what it's going to be used for. So kind of looking at it from both angles.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Let's turn to the human side. We all mentioned a little bit about this, and want to think about culture and staff and the fears that people have that sometimes they're afraid to say out loud. So one of the fears that we heard from registrants is the loss of identity, their brand, their culture, their voice. How real is that? And what actually determines whether it survives? Jen, I'm actually going to turn back to you, because it seems like it stems off of what you were just talking about.
Yeah, just the culture is really critical, and there's so many different aspects to an organizational culture. It's how you make decisions, it's how you communicate, it is how you identify risks, and mitigate those risks. And so understanding what those informal pathways of communication are, and how that operates before you go into a deal together. Sorry, I'm getting people. Oh, there we go. Okay. So understanding how those things work together, likely during a due diligence phase, and making sure that there's really a deep dive into how operations work, helps you to identify any of those risks that might not work like after a transaction. And I don't think there's enough work that's done on the people side of things. When it all comes down to it, though, mergers and acquisitions is all people decisions. There's absolutely financial and legal aspects, but if you don't have all of the people on board at every step of the process, then it can go awry very quickly.
Yeah, in fact, just to follow up on that, one of the common themes that we heard, one of the common questions is about job security. So what's the honest answer about what people do with staff, and how do you manage your staff, and how do we respond to job security?
Yeah, I happy to chat about that a little bit. I mean, to be totally honest, one of the reasons why you go into a merger is oftentimes to identify cost savings as a result of, um, services that can be done, or activities that can be done by one person, not two people. So yes, there's going to likely be redundancies in roles, and there's probably going to need to be some attrition, whether that's chosen by the individual or requested by the organization. But if you go into it with a clear understanding of what skills and future state is needed, then you can oftentimes look across the talent that you have and see where there may be skills that can be transferable to other areas where there might be less focus, or less resources already available. And not a lot of organizations do that skills assessment or talent needs assessment. And so I believe that there's a lot that you can do around that at the beginning, that won't necessarily impact the people involved in the organization.
That's some great advice. Yeah, I actually haven't seen that in the ones I've been part of. So that's awesome. Susan, we were just talking about, and welcome back. Glad to see you.
Sorry about that.
We were just talking about job security, and that was expressed as a common fear in the responses we got from our participants today. I don't know how much you heard of Jen's response, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as well, and what really happens with staff.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of thoughts on this, and to keep it high level and brief, as a social worker and someone who's committed to social justice, I've been around a lot of folks in my career that our belief is we don't want to exist in 50 years. If we're truly doing our work as an organization, how do we cease to exist? And so in the organization I was a part of that went through 3 mergers, and when I've done consulting with folks, it's really using that approach and setting aside the ego, that the organization is not because of me. The organization, I mean, if funding is lost, I could be gone anyway. And so how can I be coached as a leader if I'm an employee of an organization, or if I am the leader of the organization, that this organization is bigger than us. This is about impact. And how can we align logic models, theories of change to really look at impact? And that's a lot of what Kinsey and ResultsLab supported the organization I was a part of. And it was so helpful to have a third party to help remind us, this is about the clients. This is about the impact. This isn't about Susan or the CEO or the staff. And it is hard. It is really hard to navigate the people piece, like you suggested, Jen, of like, they are the most important part of this. And also, really, those people who are so important are there because of who we are committed to. And so really framing up those conversations, and as I mentioned earlier, the comms plan, that has to really start from the get-go, while you're also holding space for people to be worried about job security and people to be confused and upset, and like all the stages of grief as well. But having a third party, again, like ResultsLab or someone else, to really help you stay focused on, this is not about you as an individual or the identity of your organization. This is about best interest for those we serve.
I'm glad you came back, because that was really meaningful. Great message. So thanks, Susan. And on that, and leadership identity and leadership ego that's involved with many of these, Mike, I'd love to hear from you. We did hear from several of our executive directors about the fear of losing their autonomy. So how do you manage that and the identity and the ego of that leadership team, even up to the board, on both sides of a merger?
That's a bit of a loaded question, right? Because if we're merging two entities with two strong executives, are we going to have two executives when all the dust settles? And probably not. So, I can talk about structures to answer your question where if we ultimately have two divisions within one umbrella organization and they're each separate, but that may not achieve some of the synergies that are required to achieve the savings and the efficiencies that are the reason for the transaction. So, to get really humble about the tough issues, the board, and why I cite it, begin with the end in mind, and the end is the mission and helping the mission and the cause. The board is going to have to tackle some hard issues. And the board, ultimately, we can have third-party facilitators and professionals like the people on this panel, but the board has the fiduciary duty to own that mission and to make the hard choices. And yes, convey hard news sometimes. That could be that we're only going to have one executive going forward. That could be that we will have some attrition of some redundancies in positions. But that's a lot better than what I've seen. And a top mistake I see are boards that combination of we feel bad for people involved losing their jobs or losing their titles, or we're going to lose some of our identity because even though this organization serves the same cause, we're going to lose our brand name, our way of doing things, our way of life. So we're going to hope for a whole bunch of money to come in next corner. And then pretty soon they're out of money and they can't run a process. So that's a number one mistake where those hard conversations are not tackled. Organization runs out of money and then there's no longer a runway. At which point, congratulations, like you've gone down with the ship. And that's hard to put it that way, but that's just a reality.
Ouch. No, that's
One other, can I build on that?
Go ahead.
Mike, because I think you're right on with the board, and I think all of us would agree this is also a part of succession planning and sustainability. And I have a saying of like, no one's going to work at the same organization until they die. And so how is this a smart business approach as well? And I love what you said about having the board really driving that from a fiduciary responsibility piece, and also evolving to fit community needs, to fit all the other pieces that we balance in nonprofits. So just wanted to highlight that piece of like framing it as well of succession planning, sustainability, sort of that long-term strategy.
Yeah, great, thank you. So let's move on to process and the what happens through due diligence and some red flags that might come up along the way. So Mike, I'm going to come back to you. And you started this to express this a little bit in your introduction, but it'd be great to hear from you a little bit further about what organizations should be doing well before they're even in a formal conversation about a merger.
Well, a number of folks have used the term due diligence and digging in, and absolutely resources are available from your desk, right? Every nonprofit has a Form 990, and even if financial statements and accounting are not our favorite, there's a lot of information in that public document that should lead to a list of questions that gets crafted. And then before you sit down at the table with another organization, making sure that your board's aligned, that the folks leading the conversation, and there should always be a board member involved, because at the end of the day, the board is the governing body, that everybody's aligned with what we're trying to get out of this process. So some of those hard topics from my prior discussion, making sure that the board's on the same page so that we know going in, okay, we could do a deal but don't have to do a deal versus we really need to do a deal. We only have 3 months cash remaining, making sure there's alignment so that we know what we can bring back to the full board in a set of deal parameters. We know roughly what's acceptable and what would be unacceptable. And it's premature to get some kind of a written mandate out of a board at the beginning of a process. But again, begin with the end in mind. Have the board be fully educated with the good, the bad, and the ugly so that you know what your leverage position is going in and what your top priorities are in a process.
That's great, Mike. It sounds like maybe laying out some of that criteria in advance of what you would be looking for in an ideal merger before you even set out to, or ideal relationship, ideal partnership, call it whatever you want, that might ultimately end in a merger, but having that vision in mind in advance. That's great. And then Jen, through the many integrations that you've supported, what are some of the red flags you've seen along the way? What have you seen that tells you this might not work out so well?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest ones that it comes down to is process and having your processes well documented before you go into the integration. There's a lot of times where we go in post-transaction and there is not clarity around who is supposed to be doing what and when they're supposed to do a certain activity. And taking the time to actually go and document those current state processes to then go and figure out how you're going to do it together. So you have to document them individually first and then figure out how are they going to do it together. Just extends the timeline. And that takes money, right? Sometimes money and people's time. And the more you can have documented ahead of time helps to get some clarity around any risks after the transaction and going into integration. So understanding those risks and understanding whether or not you have the risk tolerance and the mitigation to deal with that post-transaction is going to be really helpful. So I believe understanding your processes is really important. Also understanding whether there's bottlenecks on people who may depart the organization. It could be the executive director. It could be key stakeholders in the organization that have a lot of institutional knowledge that could really be detrimental after you transact. So understanding what those are.
That's great. Mike, what about from the legal perspective? What red flags do you see along the way?
I think where there's misalignment in values, we want to smoke that out in writing. Right? We want to figure that out. And so hopefully along the way, you've looked at the 990, you've done some due diligence, you've looked at 3 years worth of minutes, right? Which can actually tell you a lot. What's this organization up to? How's their hygiene? Where are they spending their time and money? But having a term sheet, which is as simple as it sounds, what are the basic fundamental terms of this deal? And if one party is being acquired by the other, what are the fundamentals that acquired party hopes to retain, right? So you can have what are called covenants. It's a fancy legal term for promises, and promises need to be kept if you get them into a legal document. So for an acquired company, what are the promises that we want our acquirer to step up to? It might be a number of board seats for the acquired company board members. It might be investment in certain areas that have run short because of lack of resources. I've done a number of hospital transactions. Many hospitals are structured as nonprofits. And we've done several where the target company, we retained an advisory board of the local board, and we had covenants put in place to make investments in the OB portion of the hospital's operations, which had been underinvested in. And so the community feels a little bit disappointed. Well, we lost our autonomy. We're coming under the XYZ system, healthcare system, but we still have our local board and we're getting an investment in a core area that we've been weak on and coming out a little bit ahead there. If those things cause friction and the acquirer says no can do, or if it's you're going to utilize our people in this specialty going forward, and yeah, we can't put that in writing, you need to really think about those hard points.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay. Back to, I'm a bit of a process nerd myself. So back to what Jen was saying about the process flows and really having those documented. I'd love to turn to you, Susan, a little bit about what you've seen. You know, once you have those processes documented, they're most likely associated with data and systems. So how do you start to think about how to integrate all of that? We've always said, like, you can't put a system on top of a weak process. You have to figure that out first. So I do want to emphasize that. But then as you're looking at two different organizations and all their different types of data and all their different types of systems, how do you weed through all of that?
In my experience, it's ensuring that the program leaders are leading those conversations. Again, I'll mention ResultsLab, just from the point of typically the program leader is the expert in those pieces. It's not the CEO, which is why they have a program director. It's not the board because they're typically not involved in the day-to-day. And so how are you getting those with the most knowledge and day-to-day awareness in the same room? And again, this wasn't the case for all three of the mergers I went through in one organization, but in the final one, having someone, Kenzie from ResultsLab, to really help us see, oh, wow, we are doing the same thing. We're just talking about it differently. Or, wow, you're ultimately working towards the same, collection of outputs or outcomes. You just name it differently. Because when you're going through that as a program leader, it is hard. As much as I did not intend to let my ego go there, we care so much about our work and the organizations we're a part of. It's hard to let your guard down when it gets into the real details.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's so, I think it's more about like, let's don't duplicate programming. Let's have 1 and 1, 1 + 1 = 3. That was a lot of the mantra during the mergers we would do. And so it's not, again, about mission drift. It's how does this make sense from an output and outcome lens if we come together? And using the facts, really not relying on the feelings or the emotions or the anecdotes. So using the data in the systems to inform the data in the systems. And checking yourself as you go of like, am I just feeling this way, or is the information we have moving us towards this?
That's great. I love the concept of having sort of that translator in the middle that's saying, you know what, you guys are saying the exact same things. It's just you're using different language. So let's figure that out together. Let's figure out that dictionary that we can share together. Kenzie, I saw you pop on. Did you want to add something to this?
Sure thing. Yeah, I feel like Susan, you started to go there naturally. I do want to just call out how important this is like as a strategic strengthening of impact opportunity, right? This 1 + 1 = 3 concept, like being able to be in that space and being at that room to say for both parties, how do we come up with a model or a set of outcomes that is even like synergistically better than each of us alone? And to me, that became like the place where, sometimes it's easy to align on mission, but when you get more and more narrow, it becomes like a pressure test moment of like, can we really like step out of ourselves, of like our identity and our legacy, and really hone in on like what matters for the folks that we're serving and the actual outcomes? And so it, like to your earlier question around like red flags, that's a good pressure testing space to see like, can we get there? With the right support, can we get there to really look at, what ultimately matters versus the identity component?
Good, thanks, Kenzie. I want to turn over to funders now. We heard, as I mentioned in our opening, we heard from a number of our registrants that they just don't feel safe having these conversations today. Susan, I'd love your perspective on what's your read on that? And do you see it changing? Are foundations actively encouraging or even funding mergers right now from your perspective? And then Mike, I'd love for you to add on to that.
I can speak, maybe not exactly today, but even thinking 5, 6 years ago, and then knowing how the funding landscape has changed, I would like to believe that funders are even more willing to have these transparent conversations. When I was going through mergers as a leader of an organization, we were actually approached by funders. And the questions were, why are we funding these two organizations that have very similar outputs, outcomes? Have you all ever thought about coming together? A lot of what Kinsey was saying, 1 + 1 = 3. How can you have greater impact? And one of the funders during that time said they would make a $100,000 investment if we could demonstrate that we could do this well, with the idea that it could perhaps be a model for them moving forward as a donor. And so I think it's important to not just give ourselves that excuse around what are funders going to say if we're truly committed to building relationships with our donors, approaching that conversation delicately. But I think it might actually be rewarded from the sense of you're thinking very strategically about how to sustain and ensure their dollars go even further.
Great. Mike, anything to add?
Yeah, I love what Susan had to say there, and that anecdote about a funder being proactive and saying, we'll give more or we'll give X if you all work together. Love that. I chaired a board where there was a rival organization, for lack of a better term, and I gave our executive the directive on behalf of the board. We've got to figure this out, right? The rivalry is not helping the cause. We have to figure out how to be collaborative. And if we have to be on the high road, so be it. So like the Spike Lee movie, Do the Right Thing, like always do the right thing. That's the key. And the other version of Susan's story would be the two organizations or their leadership, and maybe it's at the board level, the executive level, coming together and uniting and going to their donor base jointly. This is very idealistic, and saying, hey, if we unite our efforts, will you guys up your funding? So a couple different ways to go about it. The analogy is in politics, it's voters. In corporate shareholder relations, it's the shareholders. And if you don't have the votes, or in this case from funders, if you don't have the dollars, you're not going to keep going.
And there has been a trend, I know, in funding for collaboration. And I just, again, echoing what you said, Mike, it's taking collaboration to a whole new level. Once you've done these other pieces we've already discussed today, due diligence and having these important conversations, but love that, approaching funders and saying, how would you feel if we went, instead of collaborating as two separate entities, really coming together to have greater impact?
Mm-hmm. So I'd love our funders who are on the call and nonprofits as well. Post in the chat for funders, what could you do to create that safety and to enable your grantees to approach you with these types of questions and desire or consideration at least. And for nonprofits, what do you need? What do you need from your funders? If you have ideas on that would be great. Mike, you started to talk about this, but I don't know if you have any specifics around how you actually start that conversation then with your funders.
Very delicately, right? And I've been on development committees of organizations where even the executive, you feel like, is jealously guarding those relationships. Relationships are key in all the other spaces I cited as well. So, having some conversations. Sometimes those hard conversations at the board level go better when they're facilitated by a third party. So a couple different boards that I chaired always had an annual retreat, and it can look different ways, but having that dedicated time and space and creating a safe space, it's a cliche, but it's so true. You've got to create a safe space to lean into these conversations, and a third party can be the mouthpiece for saying the quiet part out loud. Like, okay, we all know this is kind of obvious that our organization, this other one, gosh, we're awfully similar, and maybe we could do better together. A third party can say the quiet part out loud sometimes, or just ask the dumb question, and maybe multiple board members have said it in private, but they're afraid to say it in the group setting.
And Jen, what about staff? How do you bring your staff along, especially if you're, not at a place where you can start making promises? What do you say to your staff? When is the right time to start talking to them about this?
This goes back to what Susan said about your communication plan and what Michael said about listening. Whether you have key talking points at the beginning that are very concrete, you want to have some plan in place. And you want to make sure that you have forums available to listen to your staff. Change and transformation, which is what mergers and acquisitions are, they happen at an individual level. And so every single organization or every single individual is going to have a different experience going through this change. And if you are listening to what their triggers are, what their fears are, what their excitement is, all of that's going to really help you build a good communication plan. And it's really important to not say too much too early. I mean, there's a lot of risk in over communicating and letting rumors kind of build their own story. So it takes some art to put that together.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that then, what's the one thing you would hand to an organization before they get started? Just something really practical. It's a checklist or a question or a framework. I'm going to ask each of you, just rapid fire, like what's the one thing that each organization has to have?
I can start. I from a change management perspective, there's a framework called ADKAR, which stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And so you can work with each of the different individuals and groups through that framework.
That's great. Mike, what about you?
Jen, that was terrific. I'm going to cheat and just say, go back to your own mission statement, right? And how do you best serve that mission? Because much like on, Pirates of the Caribbean at Disney, there's like the skeleton as you're attacking, and he says, rough seas ahead, matey. Like there are tough times ahead. M&A frustrates the executives, the board in the best of transactions. So you've got to have emblazoned, like put it on the wall, the mission. And that is why we're in this. That's who we're here to serve, our constituencies that benefit from that mission, because it's going to be hard.
I love that. Susan?
I think I would echo what Jen was just talking about with the comms plan and just bringing it back to what I first said. And, having a weekly open office hours with all staff, and maybe during that time you're just hearing from them what their concerns and questions are, and you're not offering any new information, and you're acknowledging, hey, I don't have any updates, but you're keeping them in part of the process. And so the comms plan, I think, is something I just learned was a bigger deal than we originally made it out to be.
Yeah, that's great. I knew you were going to come back to that. It makes sense. And one more rapid fire question, and then we'll get over to Q&A. So for those of you on the call who do have questions, please do put them in the chat, and we'll kick that off in just a minute here. If you can each go around to, what's the rookie mistake that you see happen most often? Susan, I'll start with you.
It's too late. I think Mike alluded to this earlier of you're in financial crisis, and this is a conversation you probably should have been having a year, if not earlier. And that's why I really drill in the succession planning piece. Like, it's never too early, even if you're not digging in, to just have it on your radar. Because often by the time organizations have gotten there, it's too late.
Great. Jen?
Sorry, my dog's barking. The key takeaway is trust that you are going to have a vision that's going to be managed effectively if you engage the right people at the right time.
Okay. And Mike, what's the rookie mistake you see?
Susan clearly took mine. If you have enough way, the best advisors, all the king or queen's men, all the horses, you cannot help if you do not have enough runway left. And an adjunct to that is it takes longer than you think. This process is more arduous and takes longer than you think. Not trying to be scary, but that's just the reality. So with that one having been taken by Susan, I would go with, and it says rookie mistake, right? Your comment was rookie mistake. Everybody's
right.
a rookie in M&A, except for these professionals that you bring in to help you. So lean on your professionals. But the second most frequent is not getting it in writing. And we're very chummy. We had a dinner. We went to a retreat. Oh, everything's wonderful. Well, it's going to poison the well if I ask for them to get it in writing. Go ahead and blame one of us, one of your outside advisors, but get it in writing. Because guess what? Even when it's in writing, oh, well, that's not what I meant, or that's not what I said. You've got to flesh it out, because if it's not the deal you think you got, your board's not going to approve it, and then you have a rupture at the end.
Great advice. Good. Thank you. So I'm going to turn over to Q&A now. Let's see, we have, what are the most frequent cultural mistakes that emerge after the merger is finalized? Does anyone want to take this?
I would say that there's a lot of hidden cultural components that you don't necessarily talk about during diligence. Diligence is very list driven and structured, but it's things like how are relationships managed, how are your communications informally done throughout the organization, and what do you celebrate? It's traditions, it's things that you do kind of naturally within the organization that come day to day that you don't really think about, but really make up who you are. So it does take a minute to step back and really kind of observe that from either an outsider's perspective or just understanding what that looks like internally.
Great. Anyone else? I have one, actually. Yeah.
Go ahead, Susan.
No,
I was just going to.
It was me. Go ahead, Susan. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, no, I was just going to say ensuring there's also capacity. I mean, there's a lot of to-dos after, and you can't just be like, okay, we've merged. No one has capacity. Like, you have to ensure that you're giving time and energy to that most critical piece.
Yeah. Mike?
And we also have a question in the chat about culture. And when I'm talking about mission and begin with the end in mind, culture and mission go together. They're obviously different. We could give a seminar on the differences, but it's really important to have alignment in terms of the mission comes first, and here are our core values, and here's how we serve that mission. So, if one group is more limousine type set with galas and a couple of really rich donors, and the other is more populist and a lot of small donor donations, can we bring those together, or are those just going to be different cultures, although we have alignment on the mission? So it's a great question in the chat. And I think the more time you spend together in the courtship phase, the less likely to have a cultural rupture after. Also, I'll call out one of my cockamamie ideas for how do we keep two executives in place. We have two verticals under one umbrella organization. Well, then we're going to act and behave like two separate verticals, and it's going to be us and them. And so that's a very bad idea culturally.
Yeah.
But I was answering the question on how do you keep two executives.
Very helpful. For me, I don't know if this was a rookie mistake or a cultural mistake, but I was part of an organization that was acquired by another much larger organization. And as part of the announcement, they sat us through a 75 slide deck, hour and a half long meeting about how amazing this company is that we're all going to get to be a part of. And I couldn't tell you one thing I heard from that conversation because we were stunned. We were all surprised. This was not part of the conversation. The staff had not been informed prior, which is perfectly acceptable. That's highly typical of how it's done. But don't sit them through a giant deck about how amazing the company is that the bigger fish of the two. That was a terrible experience and a big red flag of how the cultures ultimately did not work. And we had another question about how do you use the data from the two organizations to evaluate whether the merger was effective? Susan, I think I'll turn to you on this. It's a great question.
Yeah, through our due diligence processes and coming up with a shared logic model and theory of change and being really clear, like let's don't, bite off more than we can chew in this first year or first couple of years while we're navigating the actual integration. So we definitely had program outputs and outcomes, and that was part of the commitment to funders, especially those who wanted to fund the merger. But we also had metrics around culture, staff. So what does staff retention look like? Staff satisfaction, things like that, not only to look at how does it work, but to hold ourselves accountable as a leadership team that we were looking at that and really committing to that important piece. Because without retaining staff, you spend more money in that way. So yeah, again, I think it's getting things on paper, ensuring everyone's aligned, logic model, theory of change, and not biting off more than you can chew. So you also feel like you've got some really strong wins in that first year to continue to get buy-in from staff of like, wow, okay, now I understand why this was so important. My initial thoughts, yeah.
Great. Okay, so we are just about out of time. Jen, did you want to add something to that?
Oh, I was just going to say success metrics are really important, especially when it comes to mergers and acquisitions. There's overall organizational success metrics, and then there can be success metrics defined at the individual initiative level. Things like technology adoption rates, or there could be just a really constant look at your financials month over month rather than quarter over quarter. So making sure that you have some of those mechanisms in place as you go into post-merger integration, so that you're not starting to experience revenue issues or profitability issues or anything like that.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone who participated in this. I saw a lot of chat happening, so we'll go through that. We'll scrub any questions that might have come up and make sure you get answered, and hopefully continue this conversation because there was a lot of activity, a lot of interest. Jen, Mike, Susan, thank you so much. This was extremely informative, very helpful, and we hope to continue the conversation. Everyone have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison.